Yep.
Okay, Robert? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Another minute. Okay. 6:30 on the nose. Welcome, everyone. My name is Reno Beninati. I am with the Greenspan Company, Adjusters International. We are licensed from state to state by the Department of Insurance. As public adjusters, we're known as private adjusters, public advocates, and we are here to share some information this evening. This evening's webinar is going to be specifically dealing with smoke losses. We have been getting a tremendous amount of inbound calls regarding what to do with a smoke claim. Do I have a claim? What does it look like? How does the policy respond? And so we're going to be dealing with this very topic this evening. I'm joined by some special guests tonight. We have Josh Scott with Greenspan Company, Josh has handled hundreds and hundreds of claims, large complex claims. He thinks out of the box, and we love the way he thinks. So I thought he'd be a really good addition to tonight's webinar to talk about his thoughts on how the policy actually responds to smoke damage, to smoke damage claims, etc. Also joining us is Robert Manald and Tony Lamb from Titan Environmental Solutions. They're going to share their thoughts on how and why you may want to think about getting the particulate, the soot and ash, maybe tested in the home before the insurance company just comes out to start cleaning things and getting rid of the evidence. For those of you that have breathing ailments, etc., it might behoove you to understand what may be in the particulate. I want to make it clear this evening, this is not a sales presentation by any means. This is a resource for information. We will be taking questions via the Q&A. Down the bottom of the box, you'll see there on the screen, there's a Q&A section. Please type your questions in and we will do our very best to try to answer all the questions. I will direct the questions. I'll read them, guys, and then I'll direct them to who I think would be best suited to answer those questions. Please, everybody that's on the line, mute yourselves so there's no background noise. Not you fellas, but the audience. Like I said, we've been getting a lot of calls into our office, and we thought we've been talking and I've been doing a lot of these webinars dealing with the houses that have perished, the total losses that are on the ground. But equally as many homes, if not more, are smoke damaged, or there's some degree of damage to the home. The fact of the matter is that most people are under this civil authority coverage, and the calls that were coming in, the questions were primarily, what do I do if it's past the 2-week period that I have coverage for under civil authority? Well, today I heard that there was a couple of carriers, I'm not going to mention names, but that have extended the 2-week period for loss of use, which is good. And I hope that continues, and I hope that other carriers jump on board the same thing. It's a reprieve, and that's something that is, I guess, being handled up in the management offices at these insurance companies to make a decision to extend the ALE coverage, or additional living expenses, for another week, maybe another 2 weeks, until you can get it to the property to view if in fact you have physical loss and damage to the property. Again, the property could be standing, but it could have suffered some smoke damage. I'm going to start with Josh, if you don't mind. Josh, kind of fill us in on what your thoughts are on smoke and what you've seen in the past with smoke claims, and how an adjuster might be pushing back or kind of dismissing the amount of damage that's there. And then we'll get to Robert and Tony.
Sure, and I'm going to help the crowd a little bit with kind of understanding claims in general. And this is whether you're working on a $25 million claim or a $2,500 claim. I thought about this evening. I think there's really 4 key components that any insured really needs to grasp and understand when they're going through an insurance claim like this. And they are as follows. First and foremost, you want to read and understand your policy. As an adjuster, even on a small smoke claim or a fire claim, the very first thing that any adjuster should do is read the policy and understand how the policy responds to any damage in the home, whether that be smoke smell or smoke soot, fire, no matter what the damages are. The second key component of any claim is that the insured needs to take control of that claim. And that means that a lot of insureds really think that the insurance company and the insurance adjuster is there to come in and document the claim on behalf of the insured. And that's really not their role. If you want to have a successful claim as an insured, you really have to take control of that process and document your own claim so that you can prove your claim to the insurance company. The third major component is really about documenting your file. And there's two sides of documenting any file. That's documenting the damage or smell that's in your home. And that's why the use of an industrial hygienist can be so key. And then also documenting your communications with the insurance company adjuster. And they don't have to be confrontational. Just anytime you've had a conversation with an adjuster on a phone call, back that up with an email to the adjuster, just saying that we spoke about this is what you said, this is what I said, so you have that for your future file. I think a lot of folks that are listening in tonight who have claims, you're going to find that you'll go through several adjusters very quickly because the adjusters that are coming into town, they're catastrophe adjusters. They're assigned to a particular claim for a certain amount of time and then they leave town. And that's pretty typical for the industry, but from one adjuster to another, you could get different answers. And so you want to make sure you document. And then finally is to really just pace yourself. There is a real push by insurance companies to move things quickly and to get things documented as quickly as possible. And there's a reason for that. They've done the statistics on this. The faster they can settle a claim, the less they have to pay on a claim. So anytime you're working on a claim for yourself, I can tell you from experience that pacing yourself, documenting all of your loss from the very beginning will actually pay dividends on speeding up the final resolution of your claim. So before you jump into any portion of your claim, just keep those four key components in mind. And now we'll talk specifically a little bit about a smoke claim. Smoke claims can be a little bit tricky. When you first walk into a home, you can clearly smell the smoke, and then another person could walk in and not smell the smoke. And the same thing holds true for your insurance adjuster. So if you have smoke in your home, it's very important that you document that smoke. And I think that's really where an industrial hygienist can come in and try to help you. So if you guys can maybe comment a little bit, what is your procedure about documenting and understanding what smoke really is and if it's in a home?
Robert, you got to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we do is when we first come into a home, we're going to be looking for, we're going to be performing a visual assessment, and we're looking for dark pigment particulates, which is more related to soot, ash, char from wildfire smoke. We're going to document where the locations are at and then follow that up. Once we do a full documentation, we'll start taking samples of the materials, of the particulate, and from those samples we'll send it to a third-party laboratory for analysis. So our goal and what we're looking for is any particulates that appears to be smoke-related particulates, and our industrial hygienists who would be dispatched to potential customers' homes, they're very trained and they've had a lot of experience of looking for soot and ash. A part of our sampling scheme is also is walls, ceilings, and surface-to-surface contamination.
Can you what is the method? We talked earlier about the way it's collected, and also if you can comment on that, but also the carcinogens. I was under the impression that wood is organic, and it is, but it can still be carcinogenic. And that was really interesting to me. If you can elaborate on that a little bit, please.
Yeah, so what you find with combustible products and organics and when it's incomplete combustion, you could have what's called PAHs, and PAHs they're a carcinogen and they could have health effects. Our smoke particulate samples, the wipe samples or the tape lift samples, aren't going to tell you if there's PAHs in there, but it will tell you if there's soot and ash. And when our cleaning protocol, a part of the goal is the cleaning protocol is to return the house to the residents to pre-loss condition. So once in doing that, you would, the goal is to not only clean the house so it's visually and aesthetically clean, but it's also to take away any potential carcinogens, any potential particulates, and hopefully as well remove all PAHs. And we're pretty successful in doing that in our protocols.
Interesting. And when you send out you had mentioned a third-party lab takes a look at, what's that look like, and what are they looking for in particular? And what have you seen in the past with these wildfires that comes up pretty often?
So what you're going to find is soot and ash, and some char from wildfires. Is typically what they're looking for. They'll also let us know if there's organic materials burned. So they also want to know if there's vegetation, if there's wood, so we can attribute to the fire and separate it from maybe an electric fire or another fire source. So they want to know if it is a wildfire, because a part of the loss, the carriers are also going to look for what caused the fire. Is it related to a wildfire, or is it related to maybe candle smoke or nicotine smoke? Right. So that's another thing that the laboratory is going to kind of let us know. What is the chances this is related to the fire? What's been burned? And then we can definitively say this is related to a wildfire, and the smoke has been blown over, or it's directly outside of the residence. So that's part of the process in the analytical.
And Robert, there is a condition under the insurance policy that the insured has to both first mitigate their loss, meaning it somewhat points to cleaning up the mess as soon as possible, and at the same time permitting the insurance company to see the loss in a damaged state. So I can foresee, given the scope of these disasters, that it could be a couple of weeks before an adjuster can actually get out there. Is there anything a homeowner can do to continue to document their loss and to hold some evidence for you? That way, when an industrial hygienist actually gets out to do testing, they can prove that loss, even though some amount of time has passed.
Certainly, sure. And documentation is pretty much the name of the game. Of course, photo documentation is the first thing you want to do. Take photos of the interior of your residence, exterior of your residence, and all your surfaces. Also, if you are able to, and you know where your air filters are in your HVAC system, you want to pull that filter out, preserve that filter, and also take photo documentation, something that you could forward to your adjuster, forward to the carrier, and it shows what happened as it relates to the smoke, along with the photo documentation of your residence as well. Surfaces, you'll find smoke. It's soot and ash. You probably all know who've been affected by it. Your whole house has these dark pigments, these dark particulates, and it's definitely not how the house was prior to the pre-loss condition, prior to the fire. So this is something you want to document, have it electronic with photos. It's something that you can show, because they're going to be building basically a case, not always in your benefit. So you want to have that supporting documentation that your house was impacted. So that's great. It's a good point to bring up, and preserve photo documentation, preserve the filters, and along with preserving the filters, take photos of it. And that's something that we can forward on to the carrier and to the adjuster.
Hey, Tony, I got a question for you. With respect to duct work, for instance, dryer ducts, and any other duct work that might be in the home, how do you guys go about cleaning, or even how does that work? How do they test in there? There's got to be a way to access that stuff, because I suspect that it goes everywhere. Is that right?
Absolutely. So our hygienists, they're trained to inspect the HVAC returns and the supply. Part of it is to look for the pigmentations of any black spotting or any smoke particulates. So when we do the assessment, we're taking samples of the return and the supply, and to basically send these samples to the lab to identify if there is any smoke particulates on them as well too.
And Reno, I think that's a very key component to an insurance claim, and that's why having an industrial hygienist or another expert involved is super important. A lot of insureds think that, well, I'll just get 3 bids, and whatever the middle bid is, that's what the insurance company should pay me. However, a bid has really 2 components to it. The first component is the scope of work. So what is that contractor going to do in order to mitigate the smoke that's in the house? The second component is the cost. And so you could come out with 3 different contractors and get 3 broadly different bids strictly because the scope of work is so different. However, if you get an expert to come in and tell you and write down what needs to be done to mitigate the loss, then you can actually send that out to 3 contractors and say, I want to bid this work, exactly this work. And then you're actually getting apples to apples competitive bids that you could then give to the insurance company. And that holds true for all aspects of your claim.
Interesting. I'm going to throw some questions out here. We're starting to get some questions. Randy Constable asks, at some point, can you speak to the issue many of us have relative to the VOC and benzene water contamination? The water is not usable for any purpose other than flushing your toilet. My insurance company says that does not apply to loss of use. So it sounds to me, Randy, that the water is not potable. You can't shower in it. There's some contaminants in it. Josh, have you seen where that can cause or trigger physical loss and damage? This is a big one because it's not only the power, but it's the water too. This happened up in Santa Rosa quite a bit too, that prevented them from actually rebuilding because the whole water system was contaminated.
Sure, and I've seen a couple of different resolutions for this, and the most popular one that I saw was a home that was not burned to the ground, could be remediated, and there was a disagreement on whether or not additional living expense even applied, and if the policy actually covered it. And as a compromise resolution, the insurance company agreed under the coverage of additional living expense to put a water filtration system into the building. I've seen other ones where they agreed to do a water delivery service for a certain amount of time. And I think in lieu of fighting an insured for months on end, I think if you approach your adjuster with that idea, with a reasonable cost to do it, I think they'd be inclined to cover it. But there is no guarantee on that. And folks, we should say today, and for the sake of this conversation, that, we don't have all the answers here. Every firestorm and every disaster like this has its own little nuances to it. But that'd be my recommendation for your claim if you're in that situation.
Thanks, Josh. Another question is, when I wiped my kitchen counters with a paper towel and my couch, the paper towel did not have any dust on it. Can this be considered that there is no smoke damage? Well, look, smoke damage will hang on to your soft goods, your clothing, the draperies, the wall-to-wall carpeting, the pad. So if there's a strong odor of smoke, I guess the question is, do I have a claim if it's just an odor issue? Josh, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it can be tough. I think in my own personal experience, I do believe that smell is a loss because I believe that those particulates, but for the particulate, you would not smell it. But again, different insurance companies are going to interpret it differently. The key component is that if you do smell it, in my opinion, it's probably somewhere in the house, or it's still blowing around outside. But if you do smell it, if it's heavy, the use of an expert to see if they can find it in the house does 2 things. One, it will document that you should have a claim and that your home needs cleaned, or it will document to you that you don't have a claim and you can be satisfied that there isn't any smoke in your house and it's a smell that will dissipate.
Thanks, Josh. Robert, we were talking earlier about why there's pushback from the insurance companies and how it's changed from a few years ago where they were more accepting. Can you elaborate on that a little bit and kind of help people understand the background of what's changed in the industry, if you don't mind?
Sure, sure. Previous fires, let's say an era 5 to 10 years ago, the carriers were more receptive, and they would actually contact industrial hygienist firms directly to go out and test a residence, test the structure for particulates, and wait for a recommendation of what has to be done for cleaning. Over the course of the last 3 to 5 years, as it's no secret that we have some warming of our climate, and there's more fires. So insurance companies, they do provide us insurance, but their bottom line is to protect their assets, and their assets is sometimes involves, it's not as always beneficial for the insured. So in order to reduce their liability, they've taken a stance that we've seen, not all the carriers, but it's growing numbers, that they'll send out their preferred restoration contractor, their preferred contractor who will go out there and clean it. And the reason I believe this is being done is they probably have a set price or a set structure and a set protocol of cleaning. And if you don't have someone else, a third party, come out there and test, you don't really have a protocol to follow. Whereas you can just have them do surface cleaning, and certain things can be overlooked. Number one is, we just talked about lingering smoke damage. Typically, you'll find that in fabrics, textiles, carpets, they'll retain that smoke smell that you can smell, but you might hear from your adjuster that it'll just go away. Well, it's not going to go away because it's ingrained in that fabric. So the company they send out might not be in their scope of work, that we're not sometimes entitled to see, to remove the carpeting pad. They might just say, hey, clean it, or HEPA vacuum it, to kind of move the claim along, and stuff like insulation, attic insulation, where it's more laborious to remove it and do surface to-surface they can kind of ignore that step. So I don't want to just say it's all nefarious, but they are in the business of protecting their assets, and if in doing so, that could be reducing the claim. So I believe that's kind of one of the reasons that they don't want industrial hygienists, because we're going to say, hey, clean in this aspect, and we're going to provide a scope of work that might be more extensive than their scope of work that they've set out for with their contractor.
And Reno, I can speak to this a little bit.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with having a preferred vendor, but keep in mind they're a preferred vendor for a reason. And keep in mind that preferred vendor probably gets 60 to 70% of their work from 1, 2, or 3 insurance companies. And so if you have a dispute with that vendor, who is the vendor going to side with? And who is the vendor working for? Is it you, the homeowner, who's going to have one job with that contractor in your entire life and the life of that company? Or are they going to side with the insurance company, who's going to give them 300, 400, 500 jobs for the next 10 years? So just keep in mind, the preferred vendor, they're not necessarily working for you. They're working for that insurance company. And I'll speak to one other thing. That preferred vendor is not looking to be aggressive with cleaning your building. We were talking a little bit earlier about duct work. Maybe you guys could speak to this about flexible duct work. It's my understanding and from my experience that flexible duct work, it's very difficult to clean, if not impossible. And if flexible duct work gets smoke particulates in it, the scope of work to repair your home grows drastically, because you have to dig into the drywall, dig into the walls to get that damaged ductwork out. And so you can see how a preferred vendor will come in and maybe surface clean a little bit, tell you that they've tried to clean the ductwork and it's fine, but you still have particulates on a flexible duct, and they leave it there for you to deal with a year or 2 years from now.
Thanks, Josh. I'm gonna let's get to some questions here. You know, they're starting to pile up.
Sure.
Here's one from Erwin. I'm concerned about the insulation in my attic. What kind of damage should I be looking for? Tony, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the insulation in the attic could be impacted by the smoke and wildfire particulates. Now, you may not see it. You know, that's the purpose of the hygienist to do the assessment and obtain the samples, because you know, when you send these samples to the laboratory, they're gonna look through a microscope. You know, sometimes the particulates could be microscopic, so you can't see. So that's the purpose of the assessments. So when we do assess it, if there is, you know, damages to the insulation, of course, that would be addressed in the scope of work as well too.
And is there, so let's say, for example, fast forward, a hygienist comes out, swabs the house, goes to the lab, results come back, there's some toxic stuff in the soot and ash, et cetera. Is it then at that point where a recommendation is made to have a certified cleaning individual, somebody who's trained? I thought this was an important part, not just Joe, the cleaner that can come out and, you know, wash the walls. Is that a recommendation you would?
Absolutely, yeah, because you know, you want to get these addressed properly and clean you know, because these are particulates, smoke particulates, and you want someone that's a professional that knows how to handle these claims to, you know, bring the house back to pre-loss conditions. If you get a general person who does, you know, general cleaning, they won't know the proper procedures, you know, what's outlined in the scope of work of how to properly clean the house. You know, it may sound easy to say clean, but there's a lot of steps involved and, you know, professionalism and skill involved to address the situation.
Get it all out. And yeah, for those of you folks out there that have asthma or breathing ailments, you know, you want to do it right. And there has been some pushback. I've heard some stories. I've taken some calls where the adjuster says, you know, the insured asks the adjuster, I want to have you know, the house swabbed by a hygienist. And the adjuster just said, no, we're just going to send in, you know, ServPro or Service Master, whomever, to clean it. Josh, any idea on how to deal with that if the adjuster is just trying to bowl somebody over? And if they have asthma or their children have, you know, they're going to be rolling on the carpets and stuff. Any way to rebut that? I mean, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that scope of work versus estimate that I was referring to earlier. If any adjuster wants to come in and tell you, you have to hire this company right away and start doing things, and they don't have an agreed scope of work, they don't have an agreed estimate, they're writing a check with your money. And that is not a smart business decision to make. It's always better before you start any project to have at least a general idea of what it's going to cost, and you have a scope of work defined. And if the adjuster is not willing to define a scope of work, I think it's a good business decision for the insurer to invest in someone who will define that scope of work for them, and then get the insurance adjuster to agree to that scope of work. And if that means you do have to, you know, put some of your own money up front to hire an industrial hygienist or some other expert to tell you what needs to be done, I think in the long run, that is money well spent.
Thanks for sharing. That's an important point you make. Investing in your family.
For sure.
It's not going to be, you know, agreed to have the hygienist do it. I'm going to take some questions here. So which companies do test for PHAs and also asbestos? Robert, Tony? Can you answer that one? Which companies do test for PAHs and asbestos?
We can test for PAH and we can also test for asbestos.
Okay.
So,
okay. And so is it anybody that's a certified industrial hygienist?
yeah. Yes.
Here's a question I have. Is there a difference between environmental versus industrial hygienist? Is there different certifications?
Well, there is a certification, as you know, if you're doing environmental work, you're working in industrial, you know, general cleaning like what we do. You know, some people call themselves as industrial hygienists. You know, we do have a resident certified industrial hygienist who, you know, who is certified, taking the state exam, who is accredited with the certification. So you may hear people call themselves an industrial hygienist, but you want to look to see if they are actually certified. You know, we do have a staff that is a certified industrial hygienist.
So when the lab results come back, does it go through that process where the certified hygienist reviews and makes recommendations on how to properly clean?
Absolutely.
Is that how it
So
works?
yeah, so we go through multiple stages of review process, and of course, we communicate with the industrial hygienist that's doing the assessments, and the certified person, the one that holds the certification and directs the assessment. He reviews the process, the reports prior to it being released.
Got it. Okay. And what's the timeline roughly of, so let's say it was my home and I decided to get a hygienist involved. They come in, they swab, goes to the lab, and a decision is made back at the hygienist's office on a protocol to clean properly. What's that timeline look like?
Yeah, typically from start to finish, from the time we conduct the assessment to the time you get the report in hand via email, typically takes about 7 business days.
Okay. And Josh, here's a question. And we're going to get to those questions, folks. I know they're piling up. Hang in there. This is just a very interesting topic, and it needs to be discussed. Josh, I'm the adjuster from the insurance company. You, the insured, have a duty to mitigate and move with diligence and dispatch. And so if I'm the if I tell the adjuster, hey, I need another 7 days, what's the pushback? I mean, what's going to happen there? Because think about it. You got another week. They finally get up to the property. It's been, the evacuation order is lifted. They're at their property. There's soot. There's evidence of it. The adjuster comes up to do a site visit. And what's that conversation going to look like?
So if the adjuster says you need to start now, the first question you ask is, who do you want to start it? Because I don't have anybody who has a written scope of work. What are they going to start? What do you agree to pay for? And how much do you agree to pay? And the adjuster won't be able to answer those questions. And that at minimum should buy you the time to get your test back.
Interesting. And okay, that's interesting. All right, let me take some questions here, guys. Are there particular contaminants, if detected, that force the carrier to respond besides asbestos? I guess that's an environmental question, right? Or Josh? Or,
say that one more time.
Yeah. Are there particular contaminants, if detected, that force the carrier to respond besides asbestos?
Soot, smoke particulates, those are all under the peril of fire. So if they are present in the home, then the policy responds to them.
Okay. Hey, Josh, can you elaborate? What do you mean by scope of work? What is a scope of work when we're dealing with a smoke claim?
So that is a written description of what is to be done. And in insurance claims, it can be super detailed. For example, if let's just say you had a fire or smoke damage to a room, one line would say, clean the room, clean the walls. The next line would say, clean the baseboards. The next line would say, remove and replace the carpet. The next line would say, remove and replace the pad. It will be the pad for the carpet, detach and reset the light fixtures. And it's that detailed of what does a person physically need to do within that space to bring it back to pre-loss condition. And it should be as detailed as possible.
Thanks. Here's another question. Do you recommend we hire our own RH? And if so, how do we go about finding one? Will the insurance pay for the service, or do we need to assume the cost?
I'll speak to the first part. I do believe it is covered under the policy. Not every insurance company will agree to it, but it is money well invested, I believe, in documenting your claim in the long run. And as far as how to find one, I'll leave it to these fine guys to tell us how to do that.
Look, folks, you can, the information will be posted to get a hold of Titan Environmental at the end of the webinar here. And so if you make an inbound call to them, they'd be happy to discuss your one-on-one issues directly, and that way they can answer things for you. I hope that answers your question. My adjuster says there is research that shows that toxins like VOC, heavy metals, etc., don't travel far from burnt structures, several hundred yards. Do you have any data or resources that show this type of research on propagation?
I don't know that I would focus on the propagation. I would focus on whether or not that particulate is in my house. And if it is in my house, I'm of no concern really where it came from, other than that it's a result of the fire.
Thanks, Josh. Here's another one. You touched on insulation. Could you expand more on how to know whether it needs to be replaced? Tony?
Yes, so if we were to assess the attic and we were to identify smoke particulates such are ash, of course the laboratory, with third-party laboratory, if your attic is impacted, of course you would have to clean up the attic. And insulation is a porous material that would be affected by it. So those insulation would have to be removed and cleaned out. You know, you will have to clean out your attic, and you can't just leave the insulation in there. So you know, if there's insulation, you know, whatever insulation, you know, bad, you know, pink insulation, whatever it is, it would have to be removed and cleaned in.
What about the rafters? Is that, I mean, I suspect if there's soot and ash, it's landing everywhere, not just on the insulation, but is there a protocol to wipe down rafters like the exposed wood?
Yeah, of course, that's part of the decontamination process. You're going to have to clean the whole attic. That's surface to surface, all the, you know, wood framing. You know, of course, you want to, part of the cleaning process is to remove all those porous items and clean all the interior surfaces within the attic.
Okay, so what do you guys think an amount of time would be to for cleaning of an average house, maybe 2,000 square feet? Just a rough dart throw, if you don't mind. Any idea how long it would take to clean based on if it's got soot, contaminant?
You know, that's really so case sensitive. It's hard to say. A lot of that depends on how much personal property is in the home. What are the components of the home? Is there a lot of soft goods? Is it wood flooring versus carpeting? It's such a broad question. It'd be very difficult. So, you know, you could be as much as a week. You could be 2 months. It's just really hard to say without seeing the damage.
And folks, look out there. And the reason I asked is because you know, you want to set the right expectation. A lot of people think that things move quick in the insurance world, and they just don't. We live in a high-tech society where information comes and goes extremely fast, but insurance companies just don't move that fast. You've got to get the agreed scope. If you're going to get tested, you're going to look at a week. And meanwhile, that period of restoration starts to expand farther and farther out. So that becomes a negotiable issue too, right, Josh? Where
It does.
an agreed amount of time that you are going to be out, and are they going to pay it? Whether it's the hotel or a temporary residence, that's very important to recognize that they only owe for the shortest period of restoration. So on one hand, you want to move with diligence and dispatch, but on the other hand, you want to do what's right and do this correctly so that later on, you're not coming back and, you know, just having to do it over or they miss things. And that's why we're having this discussion tonight to talk about what it really
and, you know, you bring up a good point in the wildfires here, that in the Paradise fires, there's been a lot of push by insurance companies to reach out to insureds and say, what are you doing to try to remedy your problem? What are you trying to do to rebuild? And the purpose of that from the insurance company is to really try to cut off that additional living expense by accusing the insured of not taking any action. So this goes back to one of my 4 points, and that has to do with documenting your loss. So whenever you take an action on your file, meaning calling a contractor, reaching out to somebody who can help you, just document that to yourself. Even if it's just sending an email to yourself that on this date and time, I called this person in an attempt to try to find a contractor to clean my home. And it'll pay off in the long run, because then you can document that to the adjuster if they ever do try to accuse you and not taking prompt action.
Great. Thanks for elaborating on that. Another question, any recommendations on how to choose an industrial hygienist? Are there certain certifications that they should have or certain tests they should do? Anyone, Robert or Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you would want to look to see if they are a certified industrial hygienist, you know, or you can find out if they are a smoke and fire consultant as well too. Of course, that's a certification for that. So you want to look for either or, so they can, or see what the resume is. But for the most part, you see industrial hygienists in the industry either have a CIH or they have a smoke and fire consultant certification.
And what organization certifies those guys?
So first one is the ACAC, then there's the next one is the ABIH.
Okay. Acronyms everywhere.
Acronyms, yeah, you're beating me up, Josh, on that one. I would have to.
And for the CIH is the AC, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygiene. So ACGIH is the acronym.
Got it.
Guys, here's a good question. How much does testing cost on average?
Yeah, so on average, you're looking roughly about like 22 to 2,500 for the assessments. For the hygienist to come out there to do the assessment with the laboratory analysis and with the recommended protocol necessary.
There's another one. In the presentation by Titan, they mention they rely on visual inspection and foremost to determine where to make tests. Is it established that if there is no visual trace of smoke damage, then there is no smoke damage? Is that safe to say?
No, not necessarily, because like I mentioned earlier, smart particulates, it could be microscopic. You might not be able to see it. So that's the purpose where you rely on science to obtain the sample, to send it to the third-party laboratory for an analysis, and they'll be able to identify if there is anything under the microscope.
Great. Yeah, that's a good question there. How far out bookings for Titan to come to CZU fire damaged homes? Are you guys, look, there's fires everywhere. So I guess they want to know how far out would a booking be if they called?
Typically, for that particular fire, we can go out within the week. Right now with the fire season, it is getting a little bit busier. But if they give us a call, we'll consult with them and we'll try to get out there as soon as we can.
Yeah, and I don't know that depending, obviously, folks, if the evacuation area has been lifted for your particular zone. Great question. Here's another question. In the case where there is only a mild smell, such as in the garage, like a flue or a fireplace was left open and no visual particulates, should an environmental industrial hygienist still be brought in to test the residents? Any thoughts on that?
So that's really a judgment call. I would think if you, the homeowner, feel that smell is strong enough where it may be unsafe to you, then I think that would be a good investment to call out somebody to give you an opinion. But that's really on an individual basis.
I'll answer this. The next question was, Tony, what is the name of your company? I didn't catch it in the beginning.
Our company name is Titan Environmental Solutions.
Thank you. Here's another one. I've heard of smoke damage impacting electronics, drywall, and electrical wiring. Can you comment on that? And there was a question, I think we might have missed it. It asked about what is the effect of smoke on electronics? That's a really, really good question. Can you elaborate on that, Tony or Robert?
Yeah, so obviously if there's smoke particulates and within the residence and has gone inside, let's say appliances or any sort of electronics, those, if your house is impacted by the wildfires and do have smoke particulates, you're going to have to get that addressed. You're going to have to get the professional to try to restore it to pre-loss condition. Obviously if they cannot, clean it properly or properly decontaminate, you're going to have to obviously replace it. So it also goes back to what you said earlier about should you get a professional or just a regular general cleaning person? If you have appliances, you're going to want someone who's experienced and knows how to properly clean it, if possible, and address it.
Josh, how does that, leading into that, off of that, how does that look? So my house has smoke. I've got computers and all my electronics. What have you seen in the past with respect to how the insurance company would proceed on a claim if I want to make a claim for that stuff?
Yeah, in my experience, that's the #1 area where insurance companies do not want to spend money on experts, and that's when it comes to electronic damages. They really kick back on it and just say, well, we'll send it to an electronic cleaning company. And the electronic cleaning company says, oh, of course I can clean it. And they offer, in many cases, about a 6-month warranty for that item. And it just so happens that 6 months and 3 days, the electronics fail. So really it's about getting an expert involved early to tell you if it can be cleaned or if it can't. And that's a key one. A lot of that has to do, or what can be complicated about that is the value of the items themselves. If you just have a computer, having it tested, having it cleaned, having an expert to come in and look at it could be almost the value of the item itself. So I think that's why insurance companies fight it so much. So really you have to kind of make a business decision there. Is it financially feasible to bring in an expert?
Thank you. Here's another question. What role does one's individual health condition play in the subjective assessment of loss due to smoke damage? That's an interesting question.
You know, this came up many years ago when it came to mold, and there was a real push to test, is it black mold, is it green mold, is it yellow mold?
Right.
And the company I work for, in the way I interpret it is, I don't care what color the mold is, it's mold, and it needs to be taken out of the house, and it's not healthy for anybody, and it's not supposed to be there, and it wasn't there before the fire. So I know everybody has sensitivity to that, and they should have sensitivity to that. I think that health concerns really dictate how aggressive you want to be on getting your expert health concerns are.
Okay. Another question is, after a cleaning, does the testing need to be done again, or is there an ongoing monitoring needed? Robert or Tony?
Yeah, we do recommend to conduct, post testing just to verify the remediation efforts, just to make sure that it's, it is documented, that it's, clean, properly cleaned. So you have documentation and paperwork to show that, hey, someone cleaned it, and here's the report to show that the samples are, better than before or a lot cleaner than before.
So there's an additional monitoring needed after, or is that what you're saying?
Not monitoring necessarily, but we can conduct the post remediation assessments after the cleaning has taken place.
If I suspect if there's still odor of smoke or just client still not feeling it. Okay, all right, that makes sense. Thank you. Here's another question. Is there any distance from burned homes guidelines for an insurance claim? I've read online that if a home burned within 1 mile of your home, you may have smoke damage.
I'm not aware of any publication on that. I think a lot of that would be determined on which way the wind's blowing. And a lot of the folks in these particular storms, it just depends on how smoky it was around you. I don't know of a study that talks about travel of smoke that has ever influenced a claim that I've been working.
Okay, thank you. This is Greenspan. Can you repeat the questions that you would ask the adjuster when they push back on the timing it takes to have expert testing? I guess I'm going to put that on to you. So again,
sure.
The adjuster's pushing back. Can you answer that, please? Thanks.
Sure. So if the adjuster says, hey, you need to start cleaning this tomorrow, and you can't because you have to get testing done, you need to turn that back around on the adjuster and say, I'm doing everything I can to try to find somebody to clean this building, but I can't find anybody yet, and I still need to get a scope of work established. So if you want it cleaned tomorrow, you need to bring out the contractor you want to clean it. You need to give me the scope of repair that they're going to perform, and you need to tell me how much you're going to spend of my insurance money in cleaning this building. And there's no way that that adjuster will be able to respond to those questions before you can get your testing. So that buys you the time to get your test results.
Yeah, and look, for those of you with smoke claims, it's not a limits loss, meaning you have $500,000 in dwelling coverage and maybe $300,000 in contents coverage. It's not an issue of going up against the limits or do I have enough insurance. It's a matter of how you move the claim forward properly and defendably, ultimately. So that's really a good point, Josh. Another question, will insurance pay for water testing and how often should we do it? I understand it is more a picture in time and we all have well water, so wanting to know when it is safe to drink.
Boy, that's a good one. I don't think that the policy would address damage to water. unless you could show that it was a direct result of damage caused within the house. That's a good one. That's one that we probably don't have all the answers. They would not pay for it unless it was a covered peril. I could tell you that.
Right. This one had come and disappeared, and it's back. Please talk about the effects of smoke on electronic equipment. Have you guys seen, sometimes it's corrosive. It causes pitting to metals. I've seen that over time. Right. And I suspect that on a CPU board, it would do much the same.
Right. I did several really large electronics claims in the past that had water and some soot on them. And I understand it, and these guys could speak to this a little bit more. Soot actually is somewhat acidic, and that acidity sits on metals and can actually corrode them. And that's the issue that came up on my electronic claims that I've worked.
So it is corrosive.
It can be, sure.
Yeah, so like you said before, it could, the electronic item may work for 3-4 months, and then it could just die. And I've had that happen with some claims. So yeah, certainly. Another question: would you recommend having? Would you recommend having the EH visit the home prior to the insurance company adjuster, or at the same time?
I would recommend prior. I always like to have an adjuster come out, and I have a report in front of me that says this is what the industrial hygienist is recommending that I do to remedy my house, and this is the claim that I will be making to you to fix my home. I love having that available when the adjuster shows up.
Yeah, you're being proactive. You're creating the narrative. You're controlling it. It's your home, folks. So, take control of it.
One other thing to add, Reno, is that everyone keep in mind that the adjuster that actually shows up at your door probably has very little authority and doesn't have the authority to actually say yes or no. And they will say, well, I'll check with my manager. I'll send it up the chain. I'll see what I can do. And that's something you definitely want to document, that you gave them that particular piece of information and that they were going to check with their manager to see if it was approved. So.
Here's another question. Are there any hard lines of what makes a property unlivable if there is no visible damage? I suspect that goes back to physical loss and damage must be there in an effort to have a claim triggered. Is that correct?
Yeah, there must be physical damage to the home before additional living expense is covered, other than the civil authority that you mentioned earlier.
Right. Any need for testing on outdoor surfaces or soils? Guys, Tony or Robert, outdoor?
Yeah, part of our assessment, it also includes assessing the exterior too, because, your house was impacted. So, the visual assessment and also taking samples of the exterior to see if it's, elevated as well too. So yeah, we will be taking samples of the exterior.
When it comes to land, land is not typically covered property under a homeowner's policy. So the insurance company would probably rightfully not be willing to pay for testing of any land.
I have a question. So my house is in the wildfire. It survives. Tons of ash and smoke soot outside the house, of course. We're not talking about the inside. Power washing the elevations, the driveway, the patios, the outdoor furniture. And how often have you run into this, Josh, at all, where, there's going to be, the winds are coming, right? The Santa Ana winds are going to be kicking up next season here coming up. And that particulate's going to be floating all over the place. So do I have the right as an insured to have it initially done so we can, the house is now internally cleaned, outside it's clean, but to have an ongoing contract or service come in every month to power wash it? Would they do that?
It would be, the policy strictly says that they will pay for the repair at the time of loss. So if a single event is going to be the loss. So if one fire caused soot to fall, and then 2 weeks later another fire comes, that's, in my opinion, technically a second claim. Same for any, it could be argued that those same particulates are coming back, but as a general rule, I would say you probably only get that one time. And you'd also really need to read your policy, because you talked about 2 different areas of coverage there. Your personal property that's outside, there's special limitations in some policies for that property, and then the house as well. So you got to really read and understand that policy and how it addresses that different category of coverage.
Here's another question. Is cleaning cars covered We have one car in particular that has heavy smoke smell.
Under your homeowner's policy, automobiles with licenses are not covered property. So those would not be covered under your homeowners, but you should definitely check the coverage on your auto policy. It would probably address that.
There's another question. Will the insurance cover the cost of the hygienist testing?
In my opinion, they should, yes. But again, that's just my opinion.
What if I can add in on that? Like I said earlier, previously they would cover, and certain carriers do cover it, but it's kind of a mixed bag. They're moving more towards not covering it and not covering the cost, because they would prefer to send someone out and clean it without a scope of work that's written out by an industrial hygienist. So to answer your question, that's yes and no. Some carriers do cover it and have no problem covering it. Others do not want to pay for an industrial hygienist.
Yeah, that's my experience as well.
Another question, can you explain or outline how to approach current versus long-term claims? We hear about leaving a claim open for 6 to 12 months for water testing as we are on a well. Is it possible to claim losses later on? Or would that be a current claim or an open new claim? Josh?
It also goes back to the proximate cause of the loss. So if these damages are from a single event, yes, you can continue to make supplemental claims. You would have the burden to show that the damage that you're claiming a year after the loss is directly related to the date of loss that originally triggered the claim.
Okay. Our next question is, what qualifications would you suggest to look for in an environmental hygienist? And I think we answered that before, but we'll be happy to do it again. Tony?
Yeah, so you're going to want the, at a minimum, this is our recommendation, it's the ACAC, which is the American Council for Accredited Certification. Now, if you're going to get the CIH, which is the Certified Industrial Hygienist, you want them credit from the ABIH, which is the American Board of Industrial Hygiene.
Thank you. Here's another question. If there was fire on my property that burned outdoor structures and the sides of the home, is it more likely that the insurance will cover having an industrial hygienist to do testing?
I don't know that it would change the likelihood either way. It's really a crapshoot depending on who your adjuster and your insurance company is.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Another question, a home just 50 feet away burnt. When the cleanup happens, can we claim any kind of coverage if that effort creates more particulate matter on our property and on our home? Not sure when that will happen and feel concerned about the process and how it will affect us.
I believe that would be covered. Yeah, I think that would be covered because it's the result of a fire. So yes, I would make claim for that.
Another question, a home burnt within 200 yards of mine, dozens lost in the neighborhood. Everything in my home smells like heavy smoke. What should be expectations on replacement of things like mattresses, furniture, appliances, clothes, children's items versus cleaning? I feel like most things need to get replaced, but I don't have a strong foundation to base that on.
That's where a good industrial hygienist and a written scope of repair or recommendation of replacement would highly substantiate your claim.
Another question, what about other structures like pools? Would an RH be able to determine if there are contaminants in the water? Robert or Tony?
Yes, yes, we have sampled pools before. We sampled the water, and we have had coverage where they will clean the pool. We've also had some carriers push back, but again, everything is with having the sample data, having the information and the correct scope of work, and someone who's had experience writing the scope of work of what happened, where the water came, and documentation always. You have to have photos, you have to show it, because if you don't have documentation, they're going to say it didn't happen. I mean, again, the carriers, while insuring your property, they're also protecting their assets.
That's right.
So you have to have proper documentation, and that's through testing, that's through photos, and that's through a proper scope of work.
And I'll add one more thing to pools, and it's a little off topic, but they're obviously replacing all of the water in your pool is kind of wasteful for water. There are new companies that I've seen recently that will come out and pump your water out, run it through a filter, and then pump it back into your pool, so you don't actually have to replace the water. And it's actually more cost effective than replacing the water. So look to see if that's in your area if you have that issue.
Another question, we have been recording all our calls with our adjusters. Would that suffice for documentation? I think, again, just if I may add, is recording a call that they're not aware of, is that admissible or?
That is not a good thing if you're in California, if you haven't got permission from the adjuster. It's my understanding, and I'm no attorney, but that it's actually a felony. So you don't want to be doing that without the adjuster's permission. Now, it's very simple. When you start the conversation with the adjuster, you can say, hey, for documentation's sake, I want to record this. I hope you don't mind. And as long as they say that they have your permission to record, then you should be in the clear. But doing it without their permission is not something I'd recommend.
We have answered all the questions. I want to thank both Tony and Robert and Josh for joining us tonight. Folks, if you have enjoyed the information that you received, we'd love some feedback about our webinar. Please email us, email your comments over to info@greenspan-ai.com. Before we part, guys, do you mind leaving your information maybe on the Q&A, and so that people can reach out to you guys if needed, if they have some further questions. So if you look down the bottom, Tony and Robert, there's Q&A. Just press that, and it'll allow you to make sure you're sending it out to everyone as opposed to private. And if you can put like Titan Environmental Solutions phone number and the email or your website, so they can direct any questions they may have to you directly. I'm sure there's going to be some more questions.
No problem. I'll go ahead and do that right now.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Josh, I really appreciate you being on the call.
Thanks for having me, Reno. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're a great wealth of knowledge. I always enjoy picking your brain and going through this stuff, because these firestorms and wildfires are all different, and they pose different challenges and questions. And you've been to pretty much all of them with me, and
yeah,
been quite interesting. We're seeing a lot of things changing with the insurance carriers too.
Drastically. Every event has a different kind of personality to it.
Okay. I guess there's one more question that came in while we're here. I think I have one here for non-loss smoke damage. It's clear you recommend the industrial hygienist, but do you also recommend an adjuster like Greenspan? Look, we're taking inbound calls, and feel free to call us in, and we'll have a one-on-one discussion about what your particular issues are. It's all handled on a case-by-case basis. For our involvement, it really needs to make sense on a bunch of different levels. If it's just a matter of helping you get over the goal line with some information, we'd be happy to do that as well. That's what we're here for. We're here to help. It's our way of giving back to the community, folks. This is our backyard, and we're trying to help everyone we can, whether it's just having these webinars or just offering one-on-one consultations. We're doing plenty of that. So feel free to call in. Here's another one. No, well, I don't think we're going anywhere soon.
All right.
It stopped and it started. It's okay. Not a problem. Residents have been talking about using air purifiers in the house to help with all of this. Is it worthwhile? That's definitely an environmental question. Can either Robert or Tony elaborate on that, these air purifiers?
Yeah, so air purifiers, and it kind of touches on what I said earlier. Air purifiers they have gotten better over the years with technology in removing particulates. But as I mentioned earlier, is where you're going to get some of that smell, where you're going to get some of those sustaining odors is the smoke and particulates embedded in the textiles and the fabric. So air purifier is good at cleansing the air in a particular room, but it's not going to take away that smell. So it's going to linger later because it's still there, basically. So the air purifier is kind of masking it. I mean, and I have nothing against the air purifiers. They've come a long way from where they were at. It's just, if you don't take away the source of the problem, it's still there, you're almost masking it a little bit. But the air purifier can help. I've seen them do some pretty good jobs, but you got to get rid of the soot. You got to get rid of what's creating that smell that you're picking up and sensing.
Like the dirty diaper syndrome. You can put it in the barrel, but it's there. So got it. I have one more thing came in. I'm refusing to take a call, and I'm making my adjusters correspond via email. Josh, can that pose a problem? I mean, you've got a duty to cooperate according to the policy, and if you're just non-responsive via phone, can you do that? Does that make sense?
You know, it's interesting because there's an insurance carrier, well, I'll name them. Allstate refuses to communicate via writing. They only want to do phone calls. So I say touche. If you only want to communicate via email, then go for it. That's how I feel about it.
We've got a really good question. Hi, Michael. I spoke to Michael earlier today. So my policy sets my standard of living as the standard to which they are to support me during a period of loss of use. But they seem to limit to housing. What about other things that I don't have access to, but are important to sustaining my standard of living? My adjuster is introducing a new standard while I'm on mandatory evacuation of this, evacuation of is a thing that's stuck in my house, essential, or a mere inconvenience. I think the adjuster is introducing a subjective standard that is not in my policy, which clearly states my standard of living as the expectation.
Sure. So it is a subjective thing. What is your normal standard of living? I represented a man who lived in a castle and he wanted to go rent. Obviously, for him to maintain his normal standard of living, he needed to go rent a castle to live in, but he was the only castle in town. So obviously, you're going to be running into those situations. I think for a general standard of living is the same size house in the same general area and the same general amenities if you can find it. Now, what can get very complicated is if you're a person who has a 3,000 square foot home and you live on 250 acres, you may be an unusual case in your particular area. So you feel like he's being subjective. I believe your adjuster probably is, but it is somewhat of an objective thing. In order to combat that, what I typically do is I write down the 5 things that my client really cares about to maintain their normal standard of living. And I take those 5 things to the adjuster and I say, I want all 5 of these things met. And if you can meet all of these 5 things with a home that you recommend to me, then I'm willing to look at it and I'm willing to accept it. But if it doesn't key in on these 5 things, then it is not to my normal standard of living. And I want the option that I bring to the table.
I think the question was more geared towards items that are in the house that support that standard of living, like on a contents level.
Sure.
Whatever that item may be, what is it that where the adjuster's saying, well, that's more of an inconvenience that you need that you don't have that right now. It's not a necessity. So that's
I would take the same approach. I would say if it's really a contents issue that they're and this is typical, they try to furnish it with court furnishings or a furniture rental place that'll give you 1 sofa, 1 bed, 1 dresser. It's very sparsely furnished. I think I would, to combat that, is I bring to that adjuster an alternative. I'd find a staging company. I'd find some other furniture company that's willing to lease and furnish the home in the way that to my liking or to my client's liking. And I bring that to the adjuster and say, this is their normal standard of living. This is what it's going to cost. And this is what my expectation is.
Well, let's go down a rabbit hole just for a second, if you don't mind. What if an article, a specialty item of clothing that's used for recreational reasons, and that's the standard of living. I do this thing with this item every day. That's my standard of living. Not so much, we're not talking about furniture or the house itself, but the standard of living of how I live daily and that item is stuck in my house, I can't get to it. So you, Mr. Insurance Company, pay for that item because that's part of my standard of living until I get back to the house. Is that
Sure. And are we under the civil authority here?
well, civil authority or not, even loss of use?
Under loss of use, I'm a solutions type person. So the solution I'd come up with, let's just say it's a kayak. I'm used to using my kayak every day. Well, that's a bad one because you could have a special limit. A stereo, okay, a stereo. What I would do is I'd say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Adjuster, you won't pay for me to rent this particular item. So let's expedite the resolution of my personal property claim. This is an item that I always used. I had. Okay, this is what it's going to cost me to replace. Pay me for my pay me out of my personal property bucket right away so that I can go out and repurchase that particular item.
I've been given the green light to say what it is. It's a wetsuit. Hey, it's Santa Cruz.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's right.
I'd make a claim for a wetsuit and say that my wetsuit is burned up in the fire or smoke damaged or unaccessible to me.
It's unaccessible. So is it proper to ask the insurance company to buy a wetsuit so that the standard of living can maintain the same?
Buy one is a little trickier claim. Rent one, absolutely, without question.
Oh, can you do that? I don't even know. Can you rent a wetsuit?
You never see me in a wetsuit. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't live in Santa Cruz currently, but I do actually.
I'm pretty sure you can. Yeah, I've seen them advertised for triathlons.
I hope that answers your question, Michael. So here's another question. Just curious, do you have any experience with a house that was under a fumigation tent during the wildfire? Wow. Feeling lucky that the tent probably kept particulate out of our house, covered the house in deck and vents. Going out tomorrow to see the house, I don't want the tent to give me a false hope that my house is safe.
I would say you're probably more protected than the neighbors were with the big tent over the top. So I'd probably stay pretty optimistic about that. It might be okay.
Well, look, the devil's in the details. When you get in there, folks, you're going to see if there is any, whether it's odor or particulate that snuck in. Wherever air can go, particulate can go. Is that safe to say, Tony and Robert? Wherever, yeah.
That is very true. And then also keep in mind these fires, a lot of them are pressurized. So you're getting it pushed in as well. And that's why one of our key components is to check the attics, because you have these vents in the attics and it's pressurized. So it's pushing in there. And it's somewhere that, a lot of times the carriers wouldn't mind if it was overlooked. So just keep in mind, it's always pressurized. So it's getting pushed in, and emissions and air and smoke, you can't always define where it's going, the velocity of how the smoke and the wind is coming in. So especially with these fires, they've been really high charged the last 4 years. We worked the Santa Rosa fires, and the way it came in and how fast it moved and how rapidly it was moving. That's what you're dealing with it pressurizing into your home.
Yeah, thank you for elaborating. That makes perfect sense, because it does change the atmosphere right and around that whole area. We've seen fire tornadoes happen from just the different atmospheric pressure as it's going through the area. That's a good point. There was a question here, I think. Is there any concerns about particulates in a crawl space? So you've got maybe a raised foundation, and there's vents there and such. I would assume yes, right?
Yes, certainly. For the same reason I just said, it's pressurized. You have the weep screens along your crawl space. That's to code. You have to have them. It's pressurizing in it, driving it up. So yeah, it definitely can get in a crawl space and affect your structural framing underneath. And so why this becomes an issue is you might clean the interior of your house and still notice a smell. So now you're looking, that smell might be coming from the crawl space, drawing up through the house.
So I mean, that stuff is invasive, huh? It gets everywhere. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. It's no easy task, folks. We definitely realize that. And that's why we're having this discussion, to help you understand the magnitude of what you're facing. I hope it's not a huge issue, but it is an issue, and you got to deal with it, and you got to deal with it properly. That's what we have insurance for. So we want to make sure you have the right information in an effort to have you recover properly. Another question, how do you handle testing if there's no attic per se? My home has vents up at the roof, but no access in there other than the vent as far as I know. Where it's a sealed attic completely and there's no way up in there to test. That's a good one. You'd have to cut us. Josh, would you have to do an exploratory hole through one of the ceilings?
Well, I think I would first start with walking in the house and do I have a suspicion that there's smoke in there? Am I smelling anything? And if I'm not smelling anything and I visually can't see anything, you got to make that decision. Do I go further and to start taking exploratory cuts into the house? Because keep in mind, if you don't see anything, you don't smell anything, and you make an exploratory cut, the insurance, and you don't find anything when you explore, the insurance company is not going to be willing to pay for the damage you caused in looking for your smoke.
Yep.
So you really got to does it make sense to keep going?
Excellent. Well, we're going to wrap up, folks. Thanks again for joining us. I hope this was very helpful. We enjoyed doing it. Tony, Robert, Josh, have a great night. Thank you so much for carving out Friday evening away from your families.
I'm so happy to do it. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
Bye.